Hello, thanks for joining us today. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to our webinar on Utility Asset Management 101. My name is Tess Clark. I work here at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center, and we will be getting started in just a minute. But first, there are a few logistical items that I wanted to mention. First, everyone will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. If you have a question, just type it into the GoToWebinar question dialog box anytime throughout the session. All of the questions will be reserved for a Q&A at the end, but please feel free to send questions at any point. This is the last webinar in a three-part series for Illinois water systems. Welcome back if you are attending for the second or third time. If you missed the last webinar on September 18th, you can catch up on what you missed by watching the recording on our website. And you can reach that website at www.escnetwork.org. All of our webinars can be found under the Past Events tab, and we will post a recording of today's webinar and the presentation slides shortly. And also, we'll send you a link to those materials in a follow-up email in just a few days. All right. Ordinarily, we do not submit our webinars to licensing agencies for any type of pre-approval or CEU credit. However, we wanted to make sure a TCH was available to our participants from Illinois, so please record the course ID on the slide if you need it. Please note we do send certificates of attendance as a courtesy. If you've joined the webinar with the intention of using it to support PDH or CEU hours, please just know that we can only supply certificates after we verify attendance. It can take 1 to 2 weeks to send out those certificates, and you must attend the entire webinar to receive one. You must join the webinar using the unique join link that you received when you registered, and you must be viewing the slides and listening to audio. If you have any questions about this, you can email us at smallsystems@syr.edu. All right, now for a little bit about us. The Environmental Finance Center Network provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all U.S. states and territories to help local water systems achieve their goals and stay in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And as you might guess, the EFCN is a university-based network. You can see a list of all of our network members here. We work together to create solutions to difficult how-to-pay issues of environmental protection and improvement. All right, and on that note, I'd like to introduce Brian Bonsack from the Environmental Finance Center at Wichita State University. Brian joined the EFC as a program manager in March 2018. He has more than 25 years of experience with federal fish and wildlife agencies and is an experienced technical assistance provider for the water sector. So welcome, Brian. I'm going to go ahead and make you a presenter now, and thanks for sharing your knowledge with us.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me, and we're going to get our screens transferred over. Is that looking good, Tess? Okay. Well, thank you all. Just a little bit about myself. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you guys. Actually, as Tess said, I'm a career Fish and Wildlife Agency employee. Worked for the state of Texas as well as the state of Kansas, and then spent 16 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in their headquarters in D.C. So I jumped at the chance. I'm a native Kansan and jumped at the chance to come back home to Kansas and get out of the craziness that's D.C. Oops. There we go. Now we're getting advanced. So just, yeah, I'm real excited, and to be honest with you guys, I'm real excited about this opportunity, the EFC network, and Tess talked a little bit about it already, but as a former federal employee, I don't know of anything that we had similar in the Fish and Wildlife Service. We maybe did a little bit of similar type of technical assistance through our grants program, where we had some recognized experts that would work with the local folks, but to me, this is a great opportunity for you guys, and it's very proactive on the part of EPA to provide this type of training out to y'all free of charge and so forth and so on. As like Tess said, or as Tess already showed, these are some of the areas of expertise of the Environmental Finance Center Network. If you haven't, I had not heard of us until I got hired on by the Wichita State one. It's a neat deal from my perspective. EPA has an Environmental Finance Center in each of their regions. And we're out there, like Tess said, we're university-based. We're providing a lot of technical assistance. You can see some of our specialties in there. Here at Wichita State, we're known for asset management and as well as finance and rates. So that's why we're here talking with you today about asset management. Some of the other EFCs have similar strengths. The Southwest one out of Albuquerque is also known for asset management and rates. The New York one is known, like Tess and I were talking beforehand, but right now they got a lot of focus on coastal resiliency. But my point is that we are getting funding from EPA, and in our state, in our case, and I'm sure Tess is as well, we're also getting funding from the state. So we might have funding, we might have expertise, that if you have issues that you're facing that you don't know how to address, please feel free to reach out to us, and we might be able to help you. And particularly the small systems. And looking at the list of attendees today, we got some large systems that are on, but we also have small systems. And that's really, from my perspective, kudos to EPA for providing, at least trying to provide some of the technical assistance out to the small systems that can't necessarily afford it. So reach out to us, feel free to reach out to us. We may be able to help you. And if not, we may be able to tap into a different EFC and get you some expertise that is coming out from the university level. It's kind of neat from my perspective as well, is that you're getting some of the leading researchers and leading academicians, I think that's the right term, on some of these topics. So feel free to reach out to us. We're a great resource for you. So today's agenda, kind of today's activities, I'm going to try and give you a quick overview on asset management and get you to thinking about it, as well as we'll get into some of the core components of asset management. Hopefully I won't bore you on too much, particularly on the customer input part. That's one of my specific levels of interest. And we'll have some time at the end for questions and comments. Like Tess said, if you got questions during the presentation, please feel free to email her or text her or whatever, put it in the chat box, and we'll come back to it at the end. So looking forward to trying to answer your questions. It's easy to stump me, because I am a fish and wildlife biologist. This asset management is something that we were doing in the background. I was in the planning sections, and so my agencies that I worked with were doing it, and it certainly was a critical part, but from the utility perspective, you can stump me kind of easily. So asset management, as you guys may or may not know, is getting more and more national attention, largely as a result of the America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. What that act did, and I guess it's good to see that Congress can actually recognize the importance of it. Congress passed the act and it was approved, and what it's done is going to make your state agencies include asset management, going to make them promote asset management as part of their state capacity development programs. We here at Wichita State have just recently received some funding from EPA to help the states do that. We'll be trying to help us and some of the other EFC networks. Will be helping your state counterparts do that. As we at Wichita State, we get to go out and train throughout the country. We know that states are at different levels, states and communities are at different levels of implementing asset management. If you're not sure where you're at or where your state's at in particular, EPA has actually done a nice report. If you Google it, if you Google State Assets Management Initiatives, you'll hopefully find the report out by EPA's Office of Water. It's got a nice compilation of where the states are at. And I know this webinar is intended specifically for Illinois, but just as a heads up, there are a couple other states on here. So you can kind of see where your state's at and get a feel. Recently I gave a presentation or led an all-day workshop in Rhode Island, and I think there were some folks an individual there from Massachusetts. So I think Massachusetts has implemented it statewide, asset management. So you'll see a wide range of folks, a wide range of statuses of where folks are at, both like I said, some states are implementing it, some states aren't, and some states have a ways to go, some states are leaders. So anyway, that report does a nice job of summarizing it. So what is asset management? From our perspective, asset management is the process by which you maintain a desired level of service at the lowest life cycle cost. And the most important thing is to note that, from my perspective, it's the best appropriate cost, not no cost. But making sure that it's a wise use of resources, making sure that you or your utility is providing out the services that folks need, that's going to be reliable and at the best appropriate cost. We here at Wichita State, we've got to work with some tribal entities, and the folks get confused. We were working with one up in Nebraska, and they think in that particular case they're right by the Missouri River, and the tribe is thinking that water should be free and their utilities should be free because they think they're getting the water from the river, and they don't realize that A, they're not getting the water from the river, and B, that there is a lot of treatment that goes on to provide them the service. So that is what asset management is at the big picture. Like I said, it's maintaining the desired level of service at the lowest life cycle cost. As the slide points out, asset management is designed to be a process to make management decisions easier and help people decide how and where to spend money to achieve the desired results. Now, as I look at the attendees, we got quite a list of a wide range of attendees. We got folks that include the mayors. We got a mayor or two on the list of attendees, as well as some operators. So if you're at the big picture, you got a lot of things that you need to consider when you're trying to run a utility, run it effectively and efficiently, and you've got a lot of competing needs with a lot of limited resources. A good asset management plan is going to take into consideration some of these factors and going to help you or your organization make the decisions, make good decisions, sound decisions on what should be funded. So an asset management plan is going to look at specific what your needs are and try to help you determine what the benefits are of a particular project, what are the risks of not doing the project, and the thing that I really like is what do your customers really want? That is something that this utility service industry has been kind of negligent, or maybe not negligent, but they've been a little lax to realize that customers are a very important part of the process. Not only are they paying our bills, but they're very important with making sure that they're informed as to what it takes to provide your water services and all the necessary treatments and all the expenses. The more you get, from my particular perspective, the more you get your customers educated and involved, the better off you're going to be as a utility. Some other decision-making factors are going to be what financing is available, does the project meet a critical need, best expenditure of funds, and of course looking at the alternatives. From my particular experience, I used to work in Kansas with the wildlife and parks, and we used to be a comprehensive planning state, and these are some of the factors that we were looking at. We made our employees submit this type of information every year as we were developing our internal budgets for some of our capital improvement projects. So this particular guideline or this particular slide, to me, is very useful, and it's something that you may be considering, or if you're not already implementing that throughout your budget process, this is some things that you might want to be considering, because it gets kind of complicated when you're running a utility. You get faced with you're oftentimes faced with a lot of high-dollar, expensive repairs and maintenance that you need to figure out, and you don't know how to prioritize them. So if you can come back to some of those questions, maybe perhaps force you or your staff to take a hard look and answer some of those questions from the preceding slide, you can kind of help filter out, indeed, which of these projects are going to rise to the surface and be your highest priority. From my particular example, I'm a native of the city of Topeka. Topeka is our capital city in Kansas, and they last year experienced, it's a town of around 100,000, and they experienced about 1,000 water line breaks throughout the city. So if I was them and looking at my budget, the pipeline, this particular slide, the pipe replacement may be where I'd be wanting to place my money. But in reality, that particular example, they may actually have some more pressing needs to keep their water flowing. They can maybe replace the pipes as they need, but there may be something else like the storage tank, that may be the highest priority, and get funding for the pipeline, replace it whenever they can. So anyway, if you go through that process and look through some of those issues, some of these things, particular items, are going to float to the top as what you need to be doing and good, wise use of your money. Asset management planning, from my perspective, is pretty neat if you do it right. And a lot of y'all on the webinar, maybe at the level where you're getting approached by contractors or consulting firms that want to do an asset management plan for you. And a neat thing that we go out and teach asset management planning throughout the state. One of our people that we teach with used to work here at the EFC, and she's since moved on to a different position. But before that, she was working with one of our major engineering consulting firms here in the state. And it's actually an international consulting firm. And what she likes to point out is that, yeah, her firm could come in and they could do a nice asset management plan for you. And it would be wonderful. It would be state-of-the-art or top of the line. But if you're not involving your staff in it, then it's just going to sit on the sideline and not get used. So to me, if your organization implements an asset management plan, it's neat because you need to rely on your staff. You're going to need to know, pick their brains, get their knowledge, get them engaged in the process, and in the end, you're going to get a plan that's actually probably going to get implemented, get used, and you're going to gain some of the knowledge of the entire workforce. To me, that's very, very critical in this whole concept and thinking about asset management. Last week, just as an example, I think a lot of folks are finding more and more systems are finding, particularly the small ones, that they think they have an asset management plan, and that asset management plan frequently lies in the brains or the head of their longtime operator. And that operator may or may not want to share that information with them to get it to get it written down and shared with others, because the operator may be thinking, hey, that's job security in the long term, or maybe he's just swamped and just doesn't get it. But what folks don't realize is some things can happen to that operator, and it puts the whole system at jeopardy. The example from last weekend was talking to a system out of Mississippi, and everything was in the brain, the head of a longtime operator, and lo and behold, he had a car crash, was killed, and the new operator came in and had to start at ground zero. So it's things to think about, particularly with the small systems. Get the information, think about asset management plan, get your staff involved, and start tracking it and get the information down so that you can build on it and get the information out of the long-time operators, and hopefully get them involved in the process, because that's really critical. So we're going to switch now and talk a little bit about the 5 core components of asset management. One of the most important things, and one of the areas where we kind of leads back from that previous conversation, is to determine the current state of the assets. Next up is level of service. We want to determine the level of service that you're providing to your customers and make sure that they're having input on it. That's a particular level that one of the things of my particular levels of interest. I love the communications. I used to be in the communications section of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we're always trying to reach out more and more to our customers. From the Fish and Wildlife perspective, I'll share this with y'all. Really a lot of similarities with the utility perspective. At the state level, your Fish and Wildlife agencies are funded primarily, it's the user pay, user benefit concept. We're funded primarily by your fishing and hunting license fees, as well as excise taxes on hunting and fishing equipment. So our profession, Fish and Wildlife, are really realizing the need now to reach out to customers and the importance on customers in our future, and now the utility agencies are seeing that more and more. So I love the level of service involving your customers, getting them involved and getting them up and knowledgeable about your organization. Another quick key component is criticality. Looking at how important that particular piece of information or infrastructure, rather, is to your system. Does it have backup? If it's a critical piece of infrastructure, do you have backups to it? Is that piece of infrastructure providing services to a hospital or maybe a jail, so forth and so on? Think about that, and we'll talk a little bit about it more in a couple slides later. Another important concept with asset management is life cycle costing. When do you replace things? When do you plan the maintenance? And we'll have a slide later on that shows about that. We had a great conversation and training last week where a particular small little community in Mississippi of 350 people was having one of their motors repeatedly go out, and they were having to rebuild it. And this particular place, they had to rebuild it 3 times in 5 years. And so it's like, you're at the point where you need to replace it. And we got a nice graphical slide that shows life cycle from that perspective. And finally, the last component of asset management is to consider long-term funding. So with that, we'll jump in. The first thing you need to do is start getting a state of your assets. Learning, what do I own? What you got to figure out what your system owns. Try to start getting that information just collected and start easy. If you don't have an asset management plan already in place, where we encourage folks to do, and some of your peers recommend starting, is start easy. If you're a wastewater utility, start with maybe counting the number of sewer manholes that you have in your system. Do something visible and just start easy and start building from there. If you're a public water supply and you got fire hydrants and you don't have a plan in place, start counting your fire hydrants and getting the location where they're at. I'll share an example of the city of Topeka. So this is my hometown. This is some information that they're sharing on their Facebook page, and it's they have we've got to see their asset management plan in place, and it's a good system. And here's some of the information they're sharing with their constituents. They're posing what you're seeing here as a slide from their Facebook page where they the day before they asked a question: how many manhole lids do you think we have, or true false? Do we have 20,000 manhole lids? So this is their response. And to me, that's it's something you can do once you get asset management plans in place and you can start sharing information with your constituents. As you can see, City of Topeka, 20,407 manhole lids. So once you start to figure out where you have, or what you have, then it's going to be important to know where are your assets. One of the most common things, or one of the things I really like to stress for folks to consider, is you can start collecting your information and maybe just putting on an Excel spreadsheet. But if you get the chance, consider getting into a GIS database. GIS is, back when I was initially in grad school in the 90s, GIS was just coming along, but GIS has advanced so much in recent years, it's just amazing to me. So start collecting the information, start getting your information transferred to GIS systems if at all you have the chance. And think about it, and you may think of limitations where you don't have the chance. You may think, I can't do it. But I encourage you to think outside the box. One of the things that we repeatedly stress is a lot of y'all probably have students that are going to college. Think of summer interns. It's a great project for summer interns. If you have local colleges nearby, consider maybe seeing if they have a GIS section or GIS department there on the campus, and you can probably get some nice GIS graphing work done cheaply. So it's important to start knowing, what assets do you have, where are they, and then the next important thing to think about is what is the conditions of my assets. This particular slide is one we use in our training, and we like to get input from folks as they get their opinions, and particularly like asking for folks, okay, what's your opinion of the water supply pipe on the top left? And it's kind of interesting. We get some interesting feedback. Some folks say, hey, water's flowing, so it's great. So are other systems, they're saying, hey, that's a real poor quality, that needs to be replaced. But anyway, start to get a feel or an opinion as to what are the conditions of your assets, and that's some of the information you'll want to include on your as part of your asset management planning. We propose, or we suggest, coming up with your own internal scale as to what your assets are. It could be anything from a 1 to 5. It could be a 1 to 10. You can say fair, great, excellent. Whatever it is, whatever your staff agrees on, once you get the staff buy-in on asset management plan and then planning, and then you start getting their feedback, you can get their agreement on whatever the condition of an asset is and move forward. So once again, another example that I like sharing is, once again, from the City of Topeka. This is, once again, their Facebook page from the utility department. And what they shared was, they had a question was, does the City of Topeka have utility infrastructure from the 1880s? And they posed that as a question, and this is the response up the following day. Yes, the City of Topeka does. They have infrastructure that is from the late 1880s. In this case, it's a sewer line underneath the main city. It's really generated a lot of interest internally. One of the things that I did from afar was I belonged to a Facebook group that's called, like, City of Topeka History Geeks or something like that. So I shared their initial post and the response with that group, and this is actually a member of the Facebook group happened to be one of the local reporters in the city, and they ended up getting press coverage out of the local newspaper, and I think maybe even the local TV. So like I said, that's stuff you can share once you get going with asset management plan, once you really get going, and if you have social media support or a good communications department, you can start sharing that information with your customers, and it's going to help educate them as to what it takes to provide water and wastewater services in your city and all the expenses. I like to share with folks, I'm one of those that I take water, or before I took this position, I largely took water and wastewater services for granted. And boy, have I gotten my eyes opened and learned a bunch in the year and a half that I've been here. I'm just amazed at what it takes to provide those services. I equate the utility services, personally, I equate them a lot to, like, the submarine fleet. I was up in the D.C. area for 16 years with my career and was around the military folks there. And so, it just seems very similar to me. It's like the utilities are kind of like the submarine fleet. The submarine fleet's out there, it's doing its job, doing its services, but no one really knows it and doesn't appreciate it. So that's some of the information I think you can share with your constituents once you start getting information on board and planning, getting going. So thinking about this, still staying with your assets and what you have. And another important thing that your staff, or you or your staff, as you develop a plan, you're going to want to know, what's the remaining life of my assets? And you can, some of the cases, if you're buying motors or have motors, you can rely on the engineering estimates as to how long the motor should last. You can always, go back to some of your warranties, so forth and so on, but it's going to be important for you to start getting control of your assets or knowledge of your assets and your infrastructure, when it was installed, how much of a typical useful life is remaining, and start to think about that in planning terms as you prepare for future needed improvements. To me, that's the most important thing with asset management plan. I used to work in the budget shop here at the state level with the State Fish and Wildlife Agency, and it's just important to keep that information flowing up so that your planners can help can start planning for the needed renovations and improvements that you need. So think about that in terms of what is the remaining life of my assets. And then one of the other most important things then becomes, what's the replacement value of my assets? What are you going to need? What's it going to cost to replace that motor? What's it going to cost to replace or rehab that water tower? You need to start thinking about that if you aren't already, in terms of planning, so that you make sure you have the funding available and can start, if you don't have it on hand, then start looking for some of the funding sources. So one of the things that we stress, or one of the things we're known for here at Wichita State, I mentioned, is water rates and utility rates. And so one of the things we stress is to make sure that you do have some money or some back safety accounts or emergency accounts, so that you have some of those breakdowns that you aren't planning for and didn't foresee, that you have the funding to replace it. So that's a critical part of asset management, and the replacement value, making sure that you know what it's going to cost to replace some of your key or most important pieces of infrastructure, is very, very important to know. So what do you do with the asset? What is asset management planning from the inventory perspective, or where do you start? Well, small systems, you can get, things can be written just on a sheet of paper or written down in a small spreadsheet or a generic spreadsheet. The training we do in here in state, or here that we provide an Excel spreadsheet. We use it in class, where it just lists what's the piece of equipment, when was it installed, what's the condition of it, what's the likelihood or that it's going to fail, and how much lifespan do we anticipate having left in it. So you can start very generically. I know when I looked at the list of registrations or participants in today's classes, we have some small systems and we also have some large systems. So you're going to probably be all over the spectrum on this as to where if you haven't already implemented an asset management plan, where you would start. We just encourage folks, like I said, to start small. If you don't already have things going, and just build from there. EPA has a nice free product, and they continue to provide nice technical support. If you do get more advanced and are looking for free systems, this EPA checkup program for small systems, or CUPS, is a nice program that you might want to consider using. We'd heard that it needed an upgrade, and EPA did actually fund some nice upgrades to it, so it's something that you might think of and something to consider. I played around with it some here at Wichita State, and think it's a good system and certainly worth promoting. Now we'll switch over to the next core component of asset management, and that is required level of service. And that's the thing I could probably teach or talk your leg off all day about this particular thing, because that's my level of interest, or that's my expertise, one of my levels of expertise. But it's very important from my perspective to keep the communication flowing with your customers and get them involved in as many processes as you can. We get exposed to a ton of messages every day, and here's just some of the ways that you can keep information flowing through your customers. You can do it through bill stuffers, billboards, classes. Your CCR report, Consumer Confidence Report, to me is very, very critical. A lot of systems, that's going to be the only outreach or education that you really do with your constituents, and I really encourage folks to look at that. And maybe just look at it and improve upon it. Like I tell folks, there's required things in EPA's documents as to what you need to include and report on. But I would encourage you to make it very clear whether or not your system is actually in compliance. So these are some of the things that you can do if you're not already reaching out to your customers. These are things that you can do and monitor in ways that you can start getting feedback from them on what they want. And then, if you feel comfortable with it, we encourage folks to maybe involve in your customers in as many of your processes internally as you can. this particular thing, the next few slides, we'll talk a little bit about maybe setting goals and measures for your utility, and getting your customers involved, and then tracking, getting them involved and let them know. It will help them understand more about how your utility operates, and then perhaps using them to develop some measurable goals that you're going to track and report back to them. And it's important for us from an asset management perspective for a lot of reasons to develop goals, see how you're doing with it, track your progress towards those goals, and then reporting out and letting folks know. And when you don't succeed or when you're not meeting the goals, own up to it and try to make improvements. This, to me, is a great way. Like I said, if you involve your constituents, involve your throughout your system, you'll have more and more support and more understanding of what it takes to provide those essential services of water and wastewater to your constituents. Particular town that I was living in Northern Virginia, I noticed that our local water utility has a Citizens Academy where they take them through around eight weeks of what it takes to provide water and wastewater as well as other essential utility and community services. So that's maybe something that some of your larger systems want to think about. Maybe small systems too, if you have the staff time and can devote the resources. If you do decide to set measures for your goal for your utility, it's important to keep in mind that the minimum, we must meet all regulatory requirements, but the maximum, you may want to, there may be services that you want to provide or can provide or are already providing that your customers don't know about. The example here in the state of Kansas was we were asked by the state to go work with two water systems that we're considering to combine. Here in Kansas, we have declining populations. We have, particularly in our rural areas, and what the state was hoping was that a rural water system would combine with a small city. And so they had us go facilitate a meeting, and one of the key factors ended up being where they decided not to join or resources and consolidate into one water supply plant. And the reason was the rural water folks did not soften their waters, and their board members said that their cows, honestly said their cows don't care if the water is softened or not. The water system of this small community was actually softening the water, which is a big benefit for the for their customers. And so that the additional cost of the water softening ended up being why they didn't combine. And it was great to see that both boards representing what their customers wanted and needed, and they knew about it. So it's neat to know that the agencies or the organizations in that case knew what their customers wanted, had them involved in processes, and then ultimately chose not to combine resources as a result of that. Just real quickly, we like to share some goals for you to think about. These are some things that, as we talk about goals for your systems, these are things that we think are important and things that you or your constituents may not know. Here in Kansas, a lot of our systems, we try to maintain water pressures around PSIs, around 50 PSIs. But as we travel throughout the state, we're learning of systems that are actually maintaining 70 PSI, and we actually heard of one that it was nearing 100, which the constituents may not understand all the costs and associated with that. So these are things that the more you educate your customers, the more that you let them know what it takes to provide your services, the more they can help have influence on whether the future operations of your organization and that may help you factor in on some of your decisions that you decide on which pieces of infrastructure you replace and which are most important. I talked a little bit, I wanted to come back. This is an example of CCR, and I like to stress this. This is a CCR of a small little town in southwest Kansas. And the Consumer Confidence Report, they're meeting, and this is them sharing their information out with their constituents as to how they're doing with meeting the guidelines from EPA. And I like to use this example as a good communications way for your water utilities to share your information. Because I tell folks I'm a 50-plus-year-old PhD. I like to think that I'm fairly intelligent, but when I looked at some of the CCR reports, I could look at the ranges that folks are reporting on and whether they're meeting the guidelines, but it wasn't clearly identified whether or not they're actually in compliance. So I like to share this with everyone as a potential example for you to consider with your CCR reports. If you look into the violations, no, they're clearly identified. No, they're not violations, and they're in compliance. So it's great to see that little addition of that and making it easy for your customers to know how your utility's doing. So we'll switch over next to the next important topic, which is going to be criticality and what components of your systems are critical to work with. Like I mentioned already, some parts of your system are going to be critical, and make sure you have backups if there's perhaps supporting hospitals, schools, so forth and so on. You're going to need to know internally what's the probability and what's the risk if an asset fails. Here's some of the things that happens. You have water line breaks. You can put a lot of people out of service for at least a short term. Are there legal, and one of my things, and we'll have a slide example of this in just a little bit, are there legal, environmental, or social consequences if you're not maintaining your system properly? And I should have an example here in a couple of slides from the state of Louisiana that kind of will show some of you the importance of the decisions that you are making. So one of the things that you can do, we encourage folks to do, is graph out, graphically represent or graphically look at your key infrastructure components and figure out what's the risk, the probability of failure, and what's the consequences of failure of a lot of your key pieces of equipment or infrastructure. And if you end up determining that some of your infrastructure, if it's high risk, if it goes out, if that pump or that system that's supporting the hospital or jail or prison goes out, then that's a high risk. You're affecting a lot of people, and that particular area needs to be more focused for you. What we like to talk about is low risk. What's the risk of, say, a sewer line in a cul-de-sac that may fail, and 20 residents are affected out of a town of 100. Well, that's, the probability of failure in that particular case is probably going to be low, and the consequences of failure are going to be pretty high. So we encourage you to look through at all of your infrastructure and just try to give an honest assessment as to what's the likelihood that the piece of equipment will fail, and what's the consequences. And that will also be critical factors then for you to determine where to put some of those key financial resources that you have. Because we're all, as we all know, our resources are stretched financially, and it's going to be important for you to have a good, honest assessment as to where to put your money and what particular pieces of equipment raise to the top of the heap, top of the cream of the crop for replacing. We've talked a little bit next. We'll go on to the next key component of asset management, and that is life cycle costing. There's a little bit of an art here and a little bit of a knack here, but it's important to know what are the ramifications, and particularly what are some of the things you need to consider with life cycle costing. As we talked about already, there may be legal ramifications, there may be environmental ramifications if you're not maintaining your equipment and it fails. As a fisheries biologist, I can tell you there's been some very high-dollar fish kill mitigation efforts when folks weren't maintaining their systems, and you had large fish kills in some of your rivers and streams. Legal ramifications. There are definitely legal ramifications if you're not making sound financial decisions on what needs to replace and when. Here's the slide that I mentioned here. There's a newspaper article out of the state of Louisiana regarding a mayor that actually got arrested because they wasn't maintaining their city water correctly. Now, I'm familiar with Louisiana politics, so I'm sure there's probably more things going on behind the scenes than this, but this is what the article was in the Baton Rouge newspaper, which a local town's mayor was arrested regarding the perceived mismanagement of the water resources. So keep in mind that your decisions that you make as a utility do have ramifications, legal ramifications, as well as some of the other things that we talked about. So the concept of life cycle costing, we're going to look at a couple of examples here. We've got examples here of two different ways to operate a system. One on the left, we're actually going to put more money into the repair costs and try to keep things maintained. And it looks like it's going to be more expensive, and that may be in these days and times of where folks really don't want to give the budgets that they need to maintain things, and would prefer a budget more on the right, where you just kind of you know, the initial costs are the same, but they're just, your boards and your councils are not approving the maintenance funds. And it may seem prudent, it may seem cheaper to go to that option where you're just not, you know, things are going to work. Just give them, they don't need that much repair costs. You know, Mr. Utility Manager, you don't need that much money for repairs and maintenance. But in the end, if you really factor things out, the cheaper option between those two is going to be option one. Make sure that you're, and we encourage folks, particularly I see we have a mayor or two on the list of registered participants in today's class. Think about that. Get honest feedback from utilities, or if you're the utility, if you are the utility, make sure you're providing your board with good estimates as to what it takes to run your systems, what's good estimates as to what your repair costs are, and hopefully you'll get that approved by your board and your council so your system keeps running in a good manner. Yeah, I said option one is the most economical. You may have different results, but do this analysis and make sure you give it out to your board and your utility the best answer. Routine life cycle costing and O&M, like I said, it's important that routine and preventative maintenance, to let folks know, can help extend the life of an asset quite a bit. And there are some neat things you can do to extend lives of like your sewer lines, so forth and so on, by just doing good, proper maintenance, making sure the lines are televised. You can see the root intrusions, making sure oil gets changed on key pieces of equipment, so forth and so on. It's important to make sure that your maintenance dollars are being spent. It's important to know that your staff is out maintaining what needs to be done and at a proper time. And that's, once you do get a good asset management plan in place, things are going to flow, and hopefully your maintenance schedules will be appropriate, and you'll have a good result as an end result. From keeping going with life cycle costing, you know, think of your assets, think of your high risk assets. Make sure that they're getting the preventive maintenance to try to prevent or forestall failures. It's nothing's worse than when your key pump goes out and your whole city may lose water pressure, or your key water supply line didn't get maintained or gets broken. Like I said, your whole city may get nearly run out of water. We had one of our fellow EFC members here that we have on contract is the ex-City of Wichita's main water treatment plant operator, and they had that. We have one main water supply line coming in from Cheney Reservoir north of town, and it broke. And we almost, during his tenure, he got it fixed just in the nick of time, but we almost had 300,000 people going without water in the city. So think about life cycle costing. Make sure you're getting your funds devoted to the key pieces of equipment. And then here's just some good guidelines from some of your peers that we like to share as to where your money should be with your maintenance budgets. So the recommendations of the peers are your extremely important, or your maintenance of extremely important pieces of equipment are probably going to be getting about 45% of your budget. And the things that are less important, like maybe that water supply line to the cul-de-sac, or the wastewater line to a small cul-de-sac of 12 to 15 people, or whatever the example might be, that's kind of probably very where you want to spend a little bit less of your maintenance funding. So to me, this particular slide is a good example, just a good example from your peers as to where you should be devoting your funds and making sure that things are getting spent to maintain your system in a good shape. So we'll talk a little bit more. This is a nice, like I said, of course, we're up in academia, the halls of academia. It's really nice to show life cycle costing and knowing when to repair things. So this is a life cycle cost curve. And certainly as you look towards the end, and this is mentioned the example of from Mississippi, of a small town that has this piece of equipment that's failed 3 times in 5 years. It's nice to, in theory, be able to graph out when things need replaced, but in practicality, it's a little hard to know exactly when to replace things. If you do have a good asset management plan going in place, here is about where we talk about looking at when things have been repaired. If you can guess, or if you can look at your repair records, here's where you want to replace things. In general, we want to replace them before they get to be such a maintenance budget that they're just draining things down. And that was indeed the recommendation of the fellow classmates last week in Mississippi. They're like, boy, if you've got that pump and it's 3 times in 5 years, you need to replace it. And in fact, you maybe need to get some feedback as to whether or not, it's the proper piece of equipment for this application, because it should not be failing that. But yeah, this is a nice slide, like I said, from the halls of academia as to when to replace things, and do your best you can. At the field level and actually implementing, we recommend that you do the best you can. Track your maintenance records, look at what the maintenance cost, and look at what it costs to replace things, and just do the best you can as figuring out whether, okay, do we repair it one more time, or do we go buy a new one? And keep that in mind. This particular type of graph, keep it in mind as to when to replace things. And it's not possible to know, like I said, this next little bullet point, it's not possible to know the optimal time to replace every asset, but use your staff's knowledge and do the best that you can. The other thing that we like to talk about is, and this is where I really like, is if you get a good asset management plan and you're looking at all these factors that we've talked about, then it helps you with capital project planning and validation. We here at Wichita State, we do teach a class or a workshop on capital improvement planning. And if you don't have one already in place, we really encourage you to do it. Particularly, obviously looking at the participants, the larger utilities, I'm sure you already have it in line. Some of the small ones may not. And if you don't have a capital improvement plan already being developed, we really encourage you to do it. What we hear with our small systems is, just maybe the lead operator and the city clerk can sit down and just kind of hash things out. Where are we at with this pump? When's it going to need replaced? What's it going to cost? And you can start getting the core or the foundation of a capital improvement plan on the books and start budgeting and making sure you have the funding available for it. Ideally, a capital improvement plan is for 20 years out, but realistically, it's more commonly a 5-year time frame. And keep that in mind. And projects are going to some are going to bubble up to the top 1 year, and next year the priorities will be different. But as long as you're thinking about what you need, what your systems need, and letting your boards and councils and everyone else know what you need, and to try to gain their support, it's real important so that you can keep your system running with as little hiccups as possible and keep that service as reliable as possible. We do also encourage, and we used to get funding from EPA to make, I guess it's an important point for us to point out, keep in mind energy efficiency. And that's something that you also want to think about when you're looking at your pieces of equipment and what's out there. That good old reliable generator that's been running for 40 years, without a hitch, yeah, it's running, but there may be some new alternatives that are quite a bit cheaper to run. There's just been tremendous gains in energy efficiency over the years, in recent years. So that is a factor that to consider as part of your asset management planning. From our perspective, we think, and we may be wrong in this, but we kind of assume energy efficiency has been around now, really stressed for 10 years or so. So we figure a lot of the utilities have made great advancements with it. But if you are considering energy efficiency, it is something to also factor in, if possible, into your asset management plans. And finally, the last core component of asset management is what's the best long-term funding strategy. As most of you know, or like I said, you're very similar. We're very similar from a State Fish and Wildlife Agency perspective and utilities. We're very reliable. We're very dependent upon user fees, and there are things that utilities can use to go help fund capital improvement projects. You can get loans, you can get grants. There may be special funds or bonds. But a lot of your day-to-day operations is just going to be user fees, user fee, user benefit. And these are some of the things that we talk about typically the most important factor is customer rates. But we do from time to time hear of systems that are making quite a bit of money off of customer fees with the water shut-off and shut-ons. We also, some water utilities will get a decent income. We'll help them on the impact fees. And of course, most of your utilities will have the taxing ability. So that's a big advantage for you guys. If you have not already done a recent water rate analysis or rate analysis, we do really encourage you to do that, because that's another important component of asset management planning running on in the background. And that's just taking an honest look at your resources, your financial resources, and figuring out where to go next. And that is something that we can potentially provide here at the Wichita State EFC, as well as maybe some of your other EFCs. Like I said, from my perspective, it's great because EPA is giving us funding to, not limitless funding, but we do have funding where we can potentially go out and help small systems and provide various services. So, like I said, rates are an important part of funding O&M, as we all know. If possible, rates should be fair, equitable, and cover your full operating costs. And that's what we are finding, that a lot of communities or water utilities have not had water rate increases in a few years, and so they're kind of getting behind. And they need to do an honest evaluation of what it costs to provide their services, and then also make sure that they're getting some money stuck into the reserve accounts. So asset management is a strong tool to help you build that capacity. And if you get a good asset management plan being developed and let you know what your future needs are versus your current ones, and if you factor all these things in together, you're going to have a good running system. So, and to tie all this in a little bit more together, it's always, from my perspective, it's always important to make sure that you're reaching out to your customers and informing them as to what it takes to provide the services, as well as making sure that you're reaching out to the board or your mayor or your, whoever your oversight is, or this organization. The more information you can provide those folks, the better off you are. And in the end, you're going to, it's very important to get everyone on board so that you can get rate increases that are easily supported by everybody, by the elected officials, by the boards, by the customers. So the more information that you put out, the more information you put out with your constituents, the more information that you have to generate that supports your decisions, i.e. the management plan saying, we've looked at our assets, these are things that are failing, these are things that we need, these are the services we want to provide. The more information that and educated you have everybody involved, the more likely you are to gain support for what you need to run a well-running system. And so finally, you're going to get to the asset management implementation. Some of you on the phone may already, or on the webinar, may already be implementing the asset management plans. A lot of you probably aren't. And the advice we have, is to where to start. We've already talked about it. Start anywhere. The main thing is to get started and try to build from there. And we all have time limitations, and we all have lots of responsibilities on the table, but try to take the time to get started, be it counting the manhole covers, be it counting your fire hydrants, be it just whatever, wherever you can start. Start slow and start building, and then see where it leads you to. And in the end, we think you'll get a good system that will help maintain make sure that you're providing the water and wastewater services reliably and as efficiently and effectively to your constituents as possible. So that's in general where we're at. That's like I said, you're going to see more and more interest and focus being placed on asset management as a result of that Americans Water Infrastructure Improvement Act. And so certainly in the state of Illinois, as well as throughout the country, you're going to see more and more focus on that. With that, we'll start wrapping up presentation. Do appreciate you guys' time today. Here's some of the acknowledgements that we'd like to give and like to share. Like I said, we do get significant funding from the EPA, Office of Water, and actually asset management planning actually is not a U.S. concept. It actually initially got started by New Zealand and Australia. So those are some of the folks in the background that help support the idea and are continuing to build on it. Asset management, as I told you, both Wichita State and the New Mexico Environmental Finance Center are well known for asset management planning, and we actually do, here in the state of Kansas, we get significant funding from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment to go out and teach it throughout the state. So it's been our privilege, it's been my privilege to share this information with you all today. Of course, we have to have the obligatory statement from EPA that, they do not, these are the viewpoints expressed today are not necessarily those of EPA. So just your standard cautionary warning about that. And then, like I said, we really encourage you all to request technical assistance. I'm super, super impressed with the services that we're able to provide to small systems as well as large systems. The Environmental Finance Center network is a great deal. It's fun to work with, and like I said, if you have a need, reach out to us. and we may be able to help you. And if not, we'll be honest with you and go from there. But with that, it's been my privilege to share this information with you. There's my contact information if you need to reach me. And with that, I'd raise it for any questions or any comments or concerns. So, Kat, you want to come back in?
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm right here. And before we jump right into the questions, I wanted to let you know, to everyone that watched this webinar, if you would like to help us out, you can take our evaluation and let us know how we did. That just went out to you all in the chat box. And then another little bit of housekeeping that we like to do before we'll jump into the questions is, like Brian mentioned, we do a lot of technical assistance at the Environmental Finance Center Network, and we can set you up with an expert to, talk about asset management, maybe start the planning process. So if that's something that you think you need, or you're anticipating that you're going to have to reevaluate your asset inventory, we can work with you on that. So you can let us know here, and someone will be in touch with you. I'm going to leave this open for maybe just a couple more seconds, and I'm going to close this now. So thanks for responding. And we just have a couple of minutes left. I think we have time for maybe one or two quick questions. If you do have questions, keep typing them in. We can always follow up with you after. But to get started, Brian, you had mentioned that Topeka, Kansas had shared that cool graphic about the number of manholes that they had and the impact that had. So do you have any ideas for what are some impactful facts or metrics about your utility that you could share? Some other examples may be appropriate for a small system.
Yeah, I always like the miles from the water supply line aspect. How many miles of pipe, of water pipe are you maintaining and providing? That to me is something that resonates with me. I'm trying to think of another good example. To me, that's one of the best ones. And I like that when they can share the age of the infrastructure. That's eye-opening to a lot of folks. Back when I was working in the D.C. area, we'd occasionally have water line breaks, and they would be reporting in the news that how it was actually a wood water supply line. Then once they dug down and found out, that it was that antiquated of a system. So, that type of information is great. And what we hear also is when you do have a water line break or some major piece of equipment that breaks and then gets replaced, perhaps take that when you can, either share the information, either show your staff working on the water line break, or maybe if it's a real water supply line that's terribly corroded inside and so forth, take it to your council or your board and let them see the graphic. Let them see what the issue is. Let them see the pipe and share that so folks know that, hey, it's a need for that replacement, as well as we are, we the utility are actively trying to replace it and making sure we maintain the services for you. So.
Yeah, and that really goes back to what you were saying about involving the customers from the start. So that's a great, thanks for responding to that. One last question. I think we have time for just this one more, but some consultants have recommended, that utilities release something called a consumer confidence report. Can an asset management plan maybe help with that, or can they kind of be, can they really go in tandem?
I would assume they can go in tandem, and like I said, you might stump me because I'm actually, a lot of my experience is with state fish and wildlife agencies and feds. So it's my understanding that everyone has to release that consumer confidence report every year, and that needs to be reported out to your customers yearly. So, so I think you're already providing it. You may or may not know it, but it's probably already been provided out to your customers. You can certainly then, if you're maybe are not meeting if you have violations or you're not meeting some of the requirements, then you can share that with your asset. You'd say, hey, we're not meeting this water quality standard, and the reason is we need to replace this piece of aging infrastructure. So I think you could potentially combine them, but it is my understanding that all systems have to report that CCR yearly. So.
Yeah,
You know, it would be a great touch. From my perspective, it would be a great touch to go on if you have violations and you have the need, go on and share that with your share that information. So we're not in compliance with this because this particular compound or chemical. We're not, we're having problems maintaining compliance with this because this piece of infrastructure is commonly fails and needs to be replaced.
Oh, perfect. Okay, well, I think we're about a minute over, so I think we can wrap it up for today. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing all of this information. Do you have anything else to add before we close today, Brian?
I don't. I appreciate you guys, appreciate you guys putting up with me, and I do. I love this approach from EPA, and I really, really encourage you to reach out to your EFCs and see if you have needs and see what services we can provide to you. So, and if your local EFC, if your region's EFC doesn't have the resources, then they're likely to share within the EFC network, and you might be surprised at what services we can provide. So.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.